I'm in a kind of a unique position of being on both sides of the equation. When I first started looking at Macedonia, I wasn't, and that would have been a conflict of interest if I was, somewhat involved with the government and with Kemet. But it was after the investment that I got involved with the government. So a little bit about Kemet, real quickly. It was part of Union Carbide. It's almost 100 years old. They did a management buyout in 1987, and that was right after Union Carbide got into that mess in India with the chemical release and stuff like that. So Union Carbide had to spin off some of their assets to try to keep them from being at risk. In 1992, they went public. We're on the New York Stock Exchange as KPM. Now, over the years, the last 5 or 6 years, we went on an acquisition splurge. We bought Epcos, we bought Evox Rifa, we bought Archatronics, all of which are European companies. And then just last year we bought NEC Token, but that's not part of the equation at this particular time. But they were all European companies. We wanted to get a better footprint in Europe, wider customer base, so we made those acquisitions. What it ended up with, well, a little bit more about Kemet. We produce capacitors. These are electronic devices. You all own Kemet capacitors in your iPhones and your notepads and your televisions, cars, your medical devices. Capacitors are in anything that's electric or electronic. We produced 36 billion of them last year, about 1,000 a second every second of the day. We got about 10,000 employees worldwide. That's without the NEC, which would token acquisition, which will double our size. And then today we have factories in 16 countries. With the NEC token coming in, that brings up to about 20 countries. Capacitors are in everything, as I mentioned earlier. The different types of capacitors, what they're in from wind generation to cell phones to medical devices, defense devices, anything that's electric or electronic. Our customer base is pretty significant. It's the worldwide electronic producers. We ship directly to the OEM companies, our customers. We also go through the electronic manufacturing services companies that manufacture on behalf of other companies such as Foxconn and Jago. And we also ship through distribution channels. So we got the world covered, we got all the channels covered, and we're truly a global company. We got facilities, as I mentioned, throughout the world. These are our manufacturing facilities, ranging from the U.S. to Sweden, Finland, Germany, Mexico, China, and now Macedonia. Now, the problem we had was after we did these acquisitions, we ended up with 11 facilities in Europe, mostly in northern Europe. Pretty expensive places to be. There was a lot of overlap in the production lines. We had redundant capabilities, so we had to do something to consolidate all the assets we had after the acquisition. So we went on we developed a restructuring plan, which called for us to reduce our number of factories from 11 to 4. And one of those 4 factories had to be a low-cost manufacturing facility within the European market. We were going to maintain most of these facilities as research and development because there's a real brain trust there, but the manufacturing could be done almost any place in the world. But we wanted to have a footprint in Europe. And the savings to us is $55 million a year going through that, which is not trivial. In fact, when you look at the price pressure we have on electronic components, we have to drop our prices 5 to 10% a year for the same device, or put more capability in each device. So the pressure, the worldwide pressure from a variety of competitors is enormous for us to try to continue to get cost out of our product line or enhance the products we make. In the previous life, I made personal computers, and that was about a 20% a quarter pressure on the price performance. So you either brought the price of your product down, the cost of your product down, or you increased its capability. You had to do something that got 20% every quarter of the year in order to stay competitive in the market. The components is a little bit less tedious. It's about 4 to 5% every 6 months or so on some devices. And the way you combat that is just pumping technology, and you got to find low-cost means of manufacturing, and you got to pump technology into your product line to keep the margin up. Our intention was to be able to build this facility and export to other European nations and any place else in the world where that product had some demand and it made sense to ship to. And it's obviously, from our viewpoint, Kemet's viewpoint, we had a lot of locations. I'm going to discuss some of the locations, other locations that competed with Macedonia and why we chose Macedonia. But we had to find the best location for our requirements. And from the Macedonian view, they have a limited number of resources within their country. It's a relatively small country. So they have to be selective as to who they let in. Otherwise, they'll waste resources on opportunities that are not as good as other opportunities that might come later. So they have to be careful. Now, the factors that we used to select is obviously proximity to market. We have to have some type of logistical logic of why we're there and able to get the product out of the facility to where we want it to go. Labor costs, labor inflation, or future labor costs, labor availability and their capabilities. We have a little bit different policy in Kemet. We tend to want a facility to be self-capable. In other words, we don't want to have just the labor pumping out parts for us. We want to have people that are in the factories that can solve the engineering problems, that can solve the equipment maintenance problems. We don't want to have expats over there helping them, because it's a fairly expensive proposition to take a person from one country and plant them in another country. Now, we do that within Kemet to help train people for their career development. We'll move them around the world for career development, but we don't want to have them babysit locals. We want to have factories that can support themselves. And that really ends up paying a lot when it comes to quality, the ability to change with technology, as technology changes and so forth. If you have the people in the factory capable of working with you, rather than having put somebody on the plane with a 4-month visa to go over there and teach them how to do it, or tell them how to do it, or do it for them. So we have a little bit different policy than other companies. We'd like to have all our factories to be self-contained. So the capability of the labor is important to us. They have to have to support that, they have to have an educational system that makes sense, that can constantly put more people into our factories that have the capability of running the factories for us. Technology-based, of course, we're a technology company. We'd like to be able to draw on some local technology if it exists. Political and economic stability. As you saw earlier, we've got factories all over the world. Macedonia is fairly stable. The current prime minister has been elected 3 times. In fact, he's up for election this month. Next month, April, is the election. It's kind of interesting. They're only allowed to to campaign for 30 days before the election. They can't campaign. Once they decide they're going to have an election for a new government, they only have 30 days to campaign. And we have what? It's never ending. I mean, it's 2 years at least, a minimum of 2 years. And during that 30-day period, the existing government cannot pass any type of gratuitous type of legislation to try to buy votes. So they're prevented from, for 45 days prior to the election, from passing any type of legislation of that nature. And they only campaign for 30 days. It looks like Nikola Ruski is the prime minister, and from what we see, he's probably going to make it for a 4th term. If not, then I don't get to go to Macedonia anymore, which is a nice place to visit. They need an infrastructure and I explained what they've done to provide us with the infrastructure to support the factory, and of course the logistics and the assistance. When we first started looking at a European location, we looked at these countries up here, the Czech Republic, Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, and Slovakia. And those are the first countries that pretty well show up on a lot of people's lists that they're looking for a low-cost European location. What happened to us is that I had to schedule a board meeting for the end of October in the year that we were making this decision. And in around June, in June of 2010, my CEO was in London and he saw a commercial on CNN about Macedonia. Like, where's Macedonia? Mesopotamia? What is this? You're talking about Macedonia. And so he went on the internet, learned a little bit about it, called me in the middle of the night, said he'd like to delay the board meeting because he found this other location that he might want to look at to see if it was worthwhile. I refused to let the board meeting be delayed, so I told him just speed up. And so he did. In July of 2010, they went to Macedonia and met with the government officials and other people in Macedonia, looked at the facilities or the areas that they may want to build. I'm sorry, they met with the Macedonians in Italy in July. In August, we sent a team over to do their due diligence, validation. And less than a year late after that trip, we actually started digging ground for this factory. That meant we designed the factory, we facilitated the factory all in like 9 months. Pretty fast. I have pride with the Kemet management, and that is they do things fast. I could tell, for example, when we were, when the Dodd-Frank Act was passed for, what is it called, conflict minerals, where if you use certain minerals in your product, you had to verify that no place in the entire supply chain from the beginning, digging dirt out of the ground, to the end product, your iPad or your iPhone, did any money go towards African conflict. And most of tantalum was mined in Africa. Well, this really, or the chairman and the CEO would go to jail. So I asked the government, we don't have the resources to figure this entire thing out. You guys do, and they said they didn't have the resources, so it was on our shoulders. So we figured the only way around this was to start our own mine, which we did in Africa. There's 2 major processing steps that we did not have control over or even knowledge of. And within 1 year, we not only dug the mine, got all the permits from our government, from the African government to dig a mine. We bought a company that had the trade secrets of processing this ore, and we also then hired a couple of scientists out of a competitor to help us on the other process. And within a year, we were free. And the issue why it was important to us, because the Chinese, when the Americans passed the law, all the American and European mines shut down in Africa. And all these people that were employed by these mines entered the conflict, because that's the only way they could live. They either worked at the mine or they joined the armies of various factions and they fought. And so it was estimated by the New York Times that maybe upwards of 10,000 Africans lost their lives because they entered into the conflict. So we took the other path and we opened up our own mines, our own processing facility, and within a year we were free. Now, when the Americans and the Europeans left the mines in Africa, the Chinese stepped right in and took over all the mines. And they then controlled tantalum, which is one of our critical products. Every product you have, every electronic device you have uses tantalum, and now the Chinese had control over it. This included defense products, everything, and the Chinese had control over it as an entire supply for the world, and they raised the price 5 times. So your iPhones, your iPads would have cost another $50 at least if we weren't able to change that. So we had to do it also very secretively. because as soon as the Chinese found out we were digging our own mine, they would stop our supply immediately and we would be out of business because 60% of our product required tantalum. So we would not survive. Now the United Nations gave us an award because we not only dug the mine, we built schools, we built hospitals, we manned the hospitals, we built roads, we built dams, we developed a water supply, we pay them a living wage. We don't need to pay them the dirt like the Chinese were. And last year, just actually about 6 months ago, the UN gave us an award. They estimate because we had given them a water supply to this village that we probably saved 2,000 lives from cholera. So we're pretty proud of that. And but it took these guys 1 year to figure out all these processes and to do it secretively so we could secure the supply. And so these guys move quick. To have 9 months from the time you make a decision to the time that the factory's holes are being dug for the factory is a record time. And then about a year later, we brought the factory up, and it's operating now with about 250 employees today. Going back, we had already finished our assessment of the 5 original countries, and we were leaning towards the Czech Republic as a possible candidate. Now the color chart here, obviously the red is that's a negative, that's a detriment. The yellow is that's okay, it's acceptable to us. The green says it's an advantage to us. So that's just a simple color code. Of course, there's big piles of paper and analysis and stuff like that that were behind each one of these. As you see, just from the colors, Macedonia came out pretty good. In the case of labor costs, Macedonia is about $4. This is a fully loaded with social costs, taxation, pay in there. Sounds immensely low because Bulgaria is about $5, Mexico's about $6, China's $8, going on 10. So it sounds $4 an hour, but this is employment that they're happy to have, and they're qualified people. They have language skills, and we expect that to rise fairly rapidly early on. So we anticipate that in our plan because they're going to bring other companies, and not just our company, they're going to bring other companies in. Now they have a 31% today. They have a 31% unemployment. So that's not going to last if companies like Johnson Controls, Johnson Mahee, others are coming into Macedonia. We're trying to get Delphi in there and a few others into Macedonia. Then that unemployment will go down and labor rates will go up. And hopefully everybody's happy at that point. But you have to anticipate that there's going to be labor inflation. But as compared to China and Mexico, these guys, there's a long ways to go. So there's economic value here. Plus, this has a little close proximity in Europe to our European customers, and China's pretty far away. So we covered that. Labor availability obviously is there. Bulgaria had some limitations. We have a factory in Bulgaria through our Architronics acquisition. And it's the difference between Macedonia and Bulgaria. Macedonia seems, when you're there, it's alive. There's people are converse with you in the streets. It's a fairly friendly environment. When you walk through the factory, they look up at you and smile, and you can converse with them. Partly because we both speak English. Macedonians are taught English from the beginning. When you walk into Bulgaria, just crossing the border, it just feels tired. It is the older socialist type view where everything is decided by the government and very little is decided locally. And that causes people to not care because somebody else is going to make that decision for you. You can't make a difference. So you walk from a vibrant society into a tired society, and you feel tired as you go through. The buildings are older and so forth. There's no labor organization, unions of any type in Macedonia. That's not as critical as some people think it is, whether you're organized or not. I've worked for about 40 years in electronic type factories, and I found that if you work with the unions, while they're rational, you can get a lot done because you have one voice that represents the whole organization that you're dealing with. And as long as they're not on a political stand of some sort, pushing for re-election, saying things like, we're going to take, well, like what they said with the BMW plant down in South Carolina, if they don't organize, we're going to bring them to their knees. What type of rhetoric is that? You know, that's not productive for anybody. So, but if the unions are productive and not political, you can get a lot done with them. And they understand the economics of if they get too, their labor gets too costly or other things. But I can tell you tons of stories about working with unions in France or working in unions in Germany or in the U.S. where they actually were helpful for the business. But you prefer to keep control in your hands, so whether you're organized, the labor is organized or not is a consideration. Economic stability, that's a little bit of a concern because it's a small country trying to grow, but as you'll see later, it only has a deficit of 3.9% of its GDP. I mean, we're running, what, 100% or something like that, or, I don't know, probably 40%, 35%. Their debt is about a third of their economy, not 100% of their economy. So, you know, we're getting more like Greece, and you know, we should be more like them, but like. So they have a lot of ability to react for their population. They have a lot of resources still available to them. They're not up to their neck in debt. So they have, unlike many other countries that you're looking like Slovakia, Poland, and so forth, some of them have some real debt issues coming up. The only reason why we made this yellow is because it's a relatively small country, and we don't know yet. Infrastructure, they really did a great job for us. I'm not even sure now if we did this rating today, it would probably be green because they provided electrical power, they provided water, they provided sewage, water treatment. All was pre-prepared for us. So when we built the factory, we didn't have to worry about any of that stuff, which was extremely important for the speed and whether or not the cost of trying to build it. Logistics, of course, was a little bit tinged negative. They're landlocked, although we make small little things, you know, capacitors. Some of them are big, but most of them are small. So we can ship them by air or by truck. And since we're in Europe, we can ship by truck pretty quickly up into where our consumers are. Expat friendly. The visas to bring people over. Of course, we have a policy of not living with expats for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But just in case you needed them, you wanted to be able to bring people into the country, work for a month or two to set something up without unwieldy type of restrictions from the government. This is the factory that we built. It's about 120,000 square feet or so. We're highly automated when we're making capacitors, and therefore the need to have a workforce that has a capability other than just pure labor was important to us. People have to maintain that equipment. They have to know how to operate the equipment. Just sitting there, you know, putting two things together on an assembly line is not what we're looking for. We have to have people that have the skills to learn how to operate this equipment, maintain this equipment, design improvements to the equipment, maintain the quality of the parts. When the quality starts shifting a little bit down, we have to have people that have knowledge on how to improve the processes so we get the quality back. We have a zero defect. If we have more than one failure out of a billion, not a million, a billion, then we have a problem. Because if we sell it to our German friends in their cars and that BMW stops because the capacitor burnt out, it's costly for all of us. So we have we tolerate one failure out of a billion before we step in and try to improve the process. These photographs here were before we actually manned the factory, just as we were beginning to bring the lines in. We brought lines in from the European factories that we had acquired and were moving to production, but we also brought production in from China and a production line from Mexico because of cost and proximity. It's not cheap shipping out of China, and there's a big issue about the time it takes to get a product. While the product's on the sea, or trying to make it from one continent to another, there's dollars tied up, there's cash tied up, and every company today is trying to squeeze as much cash out of their operation as they possibly can. And so time to market is important. Somebody owns that inventory while it's in the ship. Typically, if we're shipping it, it's our inventory until it arrives, but sometimes it's the customer's inventory as soon as it leaves our factory, depending on how you set up your contract. So nobody wants to hold the hot potato for very long. So we had moved lines from Mexico and China, and it was also less expensive building in Macedonia these particular products than it was in those areas. China's costs are going up fast. We have about 4 or 5 factories over there, kind of like in groups. And they're about $8 an hour, rising probably to $10 within a year or so. And if they ever floated the yuan to the market, it would be more like $10 to $12, our estimate. So Macedonia at 4 gave us a big advantage and gave us the opportunity to spend money on training the workforce, educating, helping to supplement their education and so forth, meeting our social responsibilities in the area. Let me switch a little bit about Macedonia. It's a former Yugoslavian state, I guess you can call it. It's below Serbia and Kosovo. It's north of Greece, west of Bulgaria, and east of Albania. Being south of Kosovo and Serbia did cause some concern because of all the things that happened in the 90s. But Macedonia was skillful at avoiding those conflicts. They did a masterful job in keeping the different social entities at peace with each other. There's a large, Orthodox Christian is the majority of the population, and there is a Muslim Islamic subgroup, mainly Albanian, that are also there. But they've done a tremendous job as a government keeping everything at peace. They don't get all tied up with political goals and stuff. They really truly look for harmony, and they've done a great job, and that was really important to us because we're right below where some of the really bad things occurred. I don't know, I mean, obviously you all know what happened there, and to see some of the remnants of that is really heartbreaking. Only have 2.2 million people, not a lot, but a big part of the population is young, which also is good for us because they're hungry to learn, and they have a significant educational program. 6% of their GDP is spent on education. United States, we spend 2.9, and we spend about the most in the world. Germany spends 1.8% of their GDP on education. So this was a pretty good eye-opener where their emphasis was, and it was very important to us relative to the development of the personnel that we wanted to hire. They also are a strong pro-American entity in an area that's kind of either neutral or perhaps a bit negative. They did allow us to stage troops in Macedonia when they went off to Afghanistan, and they did a number of other things. We promised them some things in return, and when the change of government occurred in the U.S., we didn't meet any of those commitments to them, and that's an embarrassment. But 91% of the population are fairly fluent in English. Now, if they're not working for an American or an English-speaking company, their language skills go dormant. I mean, you can meet them on the street and you can struggle in your conversation, like where's the nearest bar, where's, you know, stuff like that, or the restaurant. And they can communicate with you, but when they start using the language in the factories, they're pretty fluent. So it's nice to, it's important. It's important also for them, and they understand it, because English is the dominant language in industry today. Global business is an English-based business, and that's important. They recognize it, so they're really pushing English in their schools. Said population is 2.2 million. GDP per capita is now about $5,300 a person. This is from 2012, so you can see that there's some significant movement just in a couple of years. Unemployment was 37% in 2005, it's 31% now. Education back when this was taken was a bit low. I would imagine, with the emphasis that the current government has on education, that this may be significantly higher. What is significant, I don't know, and it really doesn't matter to me because we know we have enough people to hire that have the skill sets that we need. Life expectancy isn't too bad either. This is, now I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about Macedonia from why they wanted us to come to Macedonia. This is a picture I took outside my hotel room. Over here is downtown. There's a river there. It's kind of hard to see. But the other side of the river is downtown, which is this picture here. That's an opera house and a museum and some government offices. Up in the right-hand corner is a fort from about 200 BC AD. Alexander built forts and churches all over the area, from Greece to through Albania and so forth. And that was one of his major defensive or offensive facilities. They have an $8 billion euro GDP. That's about $11 million. $11 billion, not very big, obviously. We throw that away every day in this country. You got a 3.9% GDP growth rate, which is pretty aggressive as compared to the other European countries. They've maintained that rate through this last set of doldrums, where Europe had been flat to about 0.1%, 1%, or even negative. Inflation rate's a little bit of a concern. That's a bit on the high side, but not unwieldy like other developing countries that might have 10, 15, 20% inflation rates. They're held at 2.5. Deficits light, debts light. World Bank rated them as the 25th country out of about 170 countries in the world that they rated as the best to do business in. So, you know, at least they think the same way we did. I mentioned the unemployment. 54% of their GDP is service sector. That's a lot is tourism. I'll show you some pictures later. That just beautiful Lake Ohrid is just a beautiful lake. It's the largest freshwater lake in all of Europe. And it borders Greece, Albania, Macedonia, and it's just a beautiful area. But they also are pushing IT services, because you can do IT services anywhere. They have a pretty good educational base, and maybe someday when you're picking up the phone and you're talking to somebody at a help desk, it's not going to be from India, it's going to be from Macedonia. So they're pushing IT services heavily. The industrial sector is not very big when you take that percent of 8 billion euros, but that's going to move pretty rapidly as ourselves, other companies that have invested with us in Macedonia is Johnson Controls, Johnson Mahey, and there's about a half a dozen other companies that have taken the plunge into Macedonia along with us. We're not the first. I think Johnson Controls was the first, but we're among the first in there. Now, what Macedonia wants, obviously they want employment. They need to have employment to increase the quality of life of their citizens. But they want quality employment. there's different types of employment that companies that are looking to build abroad have. There are some that require no training, maybe 15 minutes of training, and if somebody's sitting on the assembly line putting things together, throw them into a pile, get another 2 things, put them together, throw them in a pile. That's not what we have, but that's the type of employment that is not, in the long term, good for the country. And they're going to spend a lot of resources, or allocate a lot of resources to a company that may want to go in there and employ 1,000 people just doing menial assembly work. As soon as the cost goes cheaper someplace else, Morocco, Sri Lanka, any place else, that whole industry will be gone. So now you have 1,000 people who are employed, that's a good thing, for a period of time, didn't develop any type of skills other than showing up to work. But they weren't trained to do anything else, they didn't get any other benefit from their job. And then when that company leaves, where are those 1,000 people, those 1,000 families or so? They're really stuck. And in fact, they're probably worse off than they were at the beginning, because at the beginning, at least they found a way to live. Now suddenly they start earning money and they change their lifestyle a bit. Now suddenly the rug's pulled out from under them. So if the country's going to allocate its workforce and its space to companies that just want to have menial labor, then that's fine for the moment, but it's going to hurt them 5, 10 years down the road, or as soon as somebody comes up with a cheaper way of doing it. It could be automated and you're gone. So it's not just a matter of the cheap menial labor versus skilled labor force. It's also the investment the company makes. So we move this equipment in, we need to buy other things to keep that equipment going. So there's a heavy capital, relatively heavy capital investment. These other companies that just have menial assemblies, very little capital investment. They may just have desks and chairs and maybe a cafeteria, and that's it. And so it's easy for them to flip the switch and go someplace else. And so when you have heavy equipment into a facility, you're going to stay there. Your ability to pick up and move is going to be a little bit less. And that's what they're looking for. They want to make sure that the employees are trained, pick up skills as they're employed. That's our intention. So we matched up there pretty good. They also want to increase exports, and we provide that pretty good. You want to have a cash trade balance that's favorable. Right now they have about $1 billion or so unfavorable trade balance, and obviously we're going to help them to the tune of probably $200 million in that. Because when we bring the capacitor, the tantalum, and the stuff that's real cheap now that we've got control of the supply chain, we're bringing in maybe 10% of the cost of the product, and we're exporting 90%. So the net is 90%. So we look pretty good to them relative to the amount of material we bring in versus what we're able to export, which is mostly labor. Also, they would like the technical base. So we bring technology to them, we're training them. Again, they're self-sufficient. So what they want is something that can sustain, that is sustainable, not just for us, but beyond us. And we provide that. So we were a pretty good match. Now, that just doesn't come accidentally. They have to do things that make it easy for us to find them attractive. By the way, that's the guy in the center is the Prime Minister. I'm over there on his left. And that's my CEO, Per Loof. He's on the right of the Prime Minister. The rest are either senior management team from Kemet or the rest of the board of Kemet in that picture. Here's me having dinner with the ambassador. Hobnobbing with the board. Now, being an ambassador to a country that's 2 million people may not be the biggest post in the State Department, but you got to start someplace. So what Macedonia did to help us and help other people, they formed these technical industrial development zones, TDIZs. They've built up these industrial parks that are fully fitted with utilities, all the utilities you need. Electric power is reasonably costly because we consume a lot of electric power in the manufacturing of our products. It's all pre-permitted, and they also have one-stop support. If you're going to try to start an entity like a factory in a foreign country, you've got to get permits for where you're going to locate, building permits, you're going to need employment permits, you're going to need visa permits, you're going to need export, import permits. I mean, there's at least 20 things you need to get, and sometimes it takes a year or more to get. In Macedonia, they gave us one person who would go get all those things for us, one-stop shopping, and that cut the time down to maybe what normally would take a good 6 months down to maybe a month. Now, we had a couple of issues on export, import, but we went to that one person and it got resolved. And in fact, it got resolved with parliamentary action to change some of the rules, because we had some materials that we're bringing in that weren't quite on their list, and they had to make some rule changes. In other countries, that would take years. And sometimes you get the permits, or you pay a lot more to get it, or you're tempted to do things under the table, which we have rules against. We will not do anything under the table, whether it's called a commission or called a favor or called whatever. We don't do that. They have favorable taxation. It's a 10% flat rate. That's for personal income tax and company income tax. It's a 10% flat rate. No deductions, no big long 18-page forms we need a couple of PhDs to figure out. Just a simple 10% flat tax. Now on the industrial side, the tax is only applied to what you take out of the company. So if you leave the cash in the company and reinvest it in more equipment or whatever, it doesn't get taxed, even though it's a profit. It's derived from a profit. You don't pay it on the profit, you pay it on the dividends that particular entity pays to the parent company or to owners or whatever. So the tax is only paid upon dividends, which really encourages you to reinvest the money. Now, one of the problems we have in the U.S. is that we have a lot of cash stuck offshore. We have $3 to $4 trillion stuck offshore that we'd like to bring back to the companies would like to bring back to the U.S., but we'll pay a 50% tax. That was another one of the Dodd-Frank Act issues. We pay a 50% tax to bring the money back, minus whatever tax you may have paid to the country where you were doing business. 50%, I don't want to give half to the government. So what do? I keep it in the country where it's at, or I move it around to other countries and I invest there. I don't bring that investment back here. They're smart in saying, hey, you can even make a profit here, but if you reinvest the money, there's no tax on it. So that encourages you to invest and keep the money local. No import duties for 10 years. No property tax or excise tax for a period of 10 years. Stable government, focus on education, and they have an aggressive anti-corruption. The judiciary is independent of the government, and they really have programs, detailed programs to avoid the reputation that a lot of developing countries have relative to trying to get money under the table because they're all underpaid. So they all try to get commissions here and there and so forth. It's rampant in China. You got to watch it in Mexico. Any place that, in Brazil, any place that you've had in developing countries, that is something that you have to really guard against. Now, we have some pretty significant audits to avoid those, and we know what the symptoms are for those things. But knowing that the government is aggressively working to minimize that corruption is a good thing to have. So you feel very comfortable doing business. I've had the opportunity to do business in most of the world. Early in my career, I built a factory in India. It was really it was in the Zeep's free zone outside of what they call then Bombay. When we built the factory, they actually built the factory by hand. No shovels, no derricks. It was a two-story factory. I insisted on it being to American facility standards, but they built it by hand. Used wood stakes to dig these trenches, they mixed the cement. Families would live in huts next to where we were building the factory, and the spouses, the wives, typically the females, would mix the cement with their feet, and the males would scoop it up, put it in baskets, and carry it up to these bamboo scaffoldings to pour. And it just turned you into, what's going on in this world when you see that. At the same token, if we did not do that, it probably meant their lives, because without the employment, there was no safety net, and they would probably perish. I mean, I saw families, I saw a lot of things that still bother me, but I saw families with a bag of stones, maybe a family of 5 or 6 people, and that bag represented their house. So at night, when they were ready to turn in, they found a place, someplace in the slum. They put these stones around in a circle or some type of pattern, and that designated their house for the night. Nobody could go into past those stones. I mean, that's the type of poverty that is throughout the world. So when we take a look at trying to develop in these parts of the world, it's important both for business purposes, but also morally. I mean, you're changing people's lives, and that's important. It's a beautiful country. That's Lake Ockrid. That's one of the small chapels that Alexander built. It's always a 1 or 2 person chapel, and he had hundreds of them all over the place. I guess whenever he felt like going to church, he had a place to go. A lot of Byzantine architecture, more statues, open markets. Here, there's still a gypsy population here, which is pretty poor population. That's what they're trying to, not by force, but by education, trying to get these people out of this begging mode. Now, some countries will gather up these people and send them away so they're not visible. Macedonia doesn't do that. They're trying to educate these people. So, in a way, I feel very good about doing business in this country as compared to some of the other places I've been to. This is this city, lakeside city of Ockrid. It's really pleasant. I mean, if you've ever been along the Riviera or something like that, it's not dissimilar. So this is a big tourist trade opportunity, but they have to be very careful in tourist trade of their assets. There's only so much land, and if you're going to sell it to somebody who wants to build a condominium, it helps you once. It doesn't really help you a lot down the road, because once it's sold, it's sold. So they're looking for resorts and hotels and things like that, which have a repeated cash exchange for them. And I think they're going to be successful, because it is beautiful. And it's not that hard. Well, it's kind of hard to get there now, because you got to fly. There's some place to fly to Istanbul to get there. I mean, you can't get there by going there. You got to go several other places. Takes about 20 hours, 24 hours of flight time to get there. So that's a little bit cumbersome. Not for the Europeans, but for us who live in Detroit. You go to Amsterdam, you go to Istanbul, and then you go to Macedonia. 3 flights.